drums, Riaz. Let's rock and roll. We, the people. These words begin the Declaration of Independence. Or is it the Gettysburg Address? No matter. The point is that these words are written on an extremely old, historic yellow document that we as a nation keep in a special vault in Washington, D.C., where each working day it is cherished by the Document Cherishing Division of the Federal Bureau of Historic Yellowed Objects. At times like this, it is important to look back on the people and events that have brought us to where we are today, for, in the words of a very wise dead man,
a nation that doesn't know its history is doomed to do poorly on the SATs.
A Sort of History of the United States by Dave Barry. A Sort of History of the United States by Dave Barry. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, America was very different. There was no cities, no civilization, no roads, no shopping malls, no Honda dealerships. The only inhabitants of America in those days were the animals, such as the deer, the antelope, and the bison. The bison must have been an awe-inspiring sight. Thousands of humongous, majestic creatures forming huge herds with their hooves thundering like, I don't know, thunder or something. Roaming from the Mississippi River across the Great Plains to the Rocky Mountains, in which they would smash into at speeds upwards of 35 miles an hour, and then fall down. You see, they were majestic, those bison, but stupid. Meanwhile, in some place like Finland, Vikings were forming. These were individuals whose idea of having a good time was to sail over and set fire to England. Then there arose a young man named King Arthur. According to legend, one day Arthur was walking along when he spotted a sword stuck in a stone. He grasped the sword by both hands and gave a mighty heave. And to the amazement of the onlookers, he suddenly saw a shadow and correctly predicted that there would be 6 more weeks of winter. The decline of Spain. On October 8th, 1565, Spain declined. By the 16th century, England was definitely experiencing a renaissance. The Golden Age in England was known as the Elizabethan era, named after the Queen, who was known as the Virgin Queen, because it wasn't considered a particularly smart move to call her the really ugly queen. Needless to say, she inspired many men to go on long voyages. This resulted in expansion. The French and Indian War is highly significant because it had a very stupid name. It sounded like the French were fighting the Indians, whereas in fact they were supposed to be fighting together. The British didn't even know they were in the war until several years after it started, by which time the French and the Indians, totally confused, had already inflicted mass casualties upon each other. So yeah, England won the war. England operated under what political scientists today describe as the insane, born-ready, diseased, hunchback, homicidal king style of government. In fact, there was one king who could barely make it through a day without beheading a wife. The Revolutionary War began with the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere. Paul Revere had insomnia. He would lie awake at night, tossing and turning, until one night, irritated by the lights from the Old North Church, he just flipped out. He jumped onto his horse and rode off into the night, shrieking. Now, against all odds, the colonists had won the war against England. But now they face an even greater task. You see, some states felt that there should be some kind of government, but they couldn't all decide on what kind of government to have. Some states wanted a strong president and a weak legislature. Some wanted a weak president and a strong legislature. Some wanted a very smart president and a dumb legislature. Some wanted a short president and a deaf legislature. Some states, like New York, wanted a very loud president and a rude legislature. The U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution divides the federal government into 3 equal branches. And this separation of powers protects the people by ensuring that any action taken by any one branch will be rendered utterly meaningless by any other branch. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are known as the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment states that members of religious parties, no matter how small or unpopular, are allowed to hassle you in airports. The Second Amendment states that since a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, you have the right to mail order high-powered weapons and then go into the woods with your friends and absolutely vaporize some deer. The Fifth Amendment states that your Fifth Amendment rights cannot be violated until you've been advised of them. And the Sixth Amendment states that if you've been accused of a crime, you're entitled to a trial by a jury of people that were too stupid to get out of jury duty. Meanwhile, in England, the situation worsened as France joined England in declaring war against Spain, unknowing that Spain had already joined France in declaring war against England. And Spain, totally confused at this point, accidentally declared war against themselves. The Civil War. This was pretty depressing. Things got so bad that Clark Gable, in what's probably one of the most famous scenes from the Civil War, turned to Vivian Leigh and said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." The Spanish-American War. Although the Spanish-American War was over in less time than it takes to order Oriental food, it still ranks as one of this country's most mightiest military accomplishments. The year 1909 saw the election of the first United States president to successfully weigh more than 300 pounds. William Howard Taft, who ran on a platform of reinforced concrete. The period directly after World War I was known as the Roaring Twenties, and for good reason. Each year had a 20 in it, like 1923, 1925, etc. The Great Depression. The Great Depression was horrible. Just ask anybody who lived through it. Or don't even bother to ask, just stand next to them for more than 2 minutes and they'll tell you about it.
The Great Depression was horrible. We had nothing to eat but floor sweepings. We had to walk 18 miles to school. Even if school was only 2 miles away, we walked back and forth 9 times. Because times were tough. You did what you had to. We worked hard for every nickel, which in those days would buy you 2 boxes of popcorn, 4 tickets to a movie, and a used Buick sedan. The times were tough, but we didn't complain. No! We didn't complain at all. We were happy. In those days, you didn't need food, or water, or toilet paper.
The United Nations. The United Nations is divided into 2 main parts. First, the General Assembly, which, in the generous spirit of the UN Charter, is open to just about every little dirtbag nation. And secondly, the Security Council, which is actually limited to countries that have mastered the principles of indoor plumbing. Now, the Security Council has 2 main functions. First, to pass broad, sweeping resolutions, and then to veto, walk on, and ignore those same resolutions. The 1950s was definitely a golden age in America. An age of opportunity and excitement for all citizens, regardless of race, creed, or color. Unless, of course, that color happened to be black. The 1960s was definitely an interesting time in America. The times were changing, but nobody expressed the spirit of the 60s better than the brilliant young poet-songwriter, irritatingly nasal whiner Bob Dylan. When, with his usual insightfulness, he sang this. How many times can a man be a man before a man is a man? The Kennedy administration. Kennedy immediately got the ball rolling in his first inaugural address, in which he ended with these stirring words. Ask not what your country cannot do that you cannot do, nor what cannot be done by neither you nor your country. The 1980 presidential election campaign. The turning point in the election came during the debates between Reagan and Carter. To everything Carter would say, Reagan would simply shake his head in a personable manner and say, "There you go again." Even if Carter had stated that the earth was round, Reagan would have simply shaken his head in a personable manner and said, "There you go again." And voters all around the United States would have said, "Yeah! What does Carter think we are? Stupid?" In the end, we do know this. America is a strong and great country, and her people have withstood many trials and tribulations. Actually, more tribulations than trials, because most of them never made it to trial. But whatever problems lie ahead, may we be sure of this. If we all stand together and hang tough, there will come a day, maybe not in the next few years, maybe not even in our lifetimes, but one day, we'll see the end of Nixon's career.